Welcome to the Transformational Leadership Institute Business School, and this is the Executive Business Incubator. Today's session is called Public Speaking Skills for Marketing and Influence. And let me tell you a little bit of my story. My name is Rudy Lopez. I'm originally from Mexico. I am now working as a leadership coach and public speaking mentor. Part of the John Maxwell team faculty with a specialization in communication and public speaking. I have a global experience in executive roles in the corporate world and have done many numerous trainings on different topics. And another thing that I'm very excited about is my family. I've been married for 26 years to my beautiful wife, Mary, and we have 2 sons, and we live in Houston. But like I said a little while ago, I grew up in Mexico. And part of my childhood, we were very poor. I mean, definitely very poor. I remember like when it was winter, that the cold was extremely cold. And inside my house, we had no heating. So at the time when we were supposed to sleep at night, my mother would cover us with, I think it's maybe 10 to 12 blankets. They were very heavy on top of us, but that's what we needed to feel the warmth and be able to sleep at night. And in the mornings, I would wake up and see daylight. But it wasn't because I was looking out the window. It was because our house had many holes on the walls, holes everywhere. And so when I would open my eyes, I would look right outside a hole on the wall and see outside, see the daylight outside. So we were poor. It was tough times. And as I was growing older, I started thinking, what do I have to do to get out of this poor environment? And my conclusion was, based on my understanding of what leadership represented, it really meant that I needed to become a leader because leaders have lots of money, lots of power, and they were famous. And that's what I wanted for my life: money, power, and fame. So, but let me tell you something. I thought that the best leaders in Mexico were, because they were the ones with a lot of money, a lot of power, and a lot of fame. They were the drug lords in the mafia or the famous but corrupt politicians. And I thought, just to make sure, I should be both. And so up until my teenage years, I was working on arriving at that destination to become both. But thankfully, God had another plan for me. And so he opened the doors for my family and I to move to the United States. And I say thankfully because really, not only because what is obvious, but let me tell you that it was really hard to live that life. To live that life thinking that you had enemies everywhere. You were not safe anywhere. Had to be stressed, had to be concerned, had to be watching your back. And so, by that age, I was thinking maybe I had made the wrong decision. So God supported that, and he took me out and my family out of that environment. And we came to the United States. And it was here where God started changing me. And yes, so many of those thoughts of the past of, wanting to be involved in those bad areas had already left me. I was not thinking them. And yet, I had not changed my leadership style. What I had learned in my environment was that in order to get ahead, in order to be successful, you have to take advantage of people. You have to use people. So even though I was living here in the US, that leadership style had not left me. So I am very grateful because God allowed certain people, servant leaders, to come into my life at different points in time. And they were the ones who showed me how true leaders really live. That was very enlightening to me. Very, very enlightening. And so one of those people was my friend, Rick. Rick, I met him in the early part of the last decade in the maybe 2001 time frame. And so he and his family were attending the church where my family and I congregated. Rick was very humble, down to earth, wise, charismatic person. He had a smile for everyone. His friendly and caring attitude would make everyone feel like he was your best friend. And it still took me quite a while to get to know him better. And so I learned that he decided at the age of 4 that he wanted to be an astronaut. And many children say that they want to be astronauts, they want to be police officers, firefighters, they want to be doctors, nurses, or teachers. And yet, Rick was different because he kept saying the same thing, throughout the years in his grade school years, when he joined high school, and he was taking classes to prepare to become an astronaut. And when it was his time to join the university, he studied a bachelor's and a master's in engineering because he had learned that that would increase his chances to become an astronaut. He also joined the United States Air Force because that would improve his chances to become an astronaut. And later on, he signed up to become a test pilot with the Air Force because flying those high risk airplanes would prepare him to the very stressful environment that astronauts have to deal with. So he was doing everything he could, every action he could take, everything was designed to help him become an astronaut. And I mean everything. People who knew him back then say that, he was so committed that that was his sole focus. And, as time went by, 3 decades, pretty much, that's when he started saying that he felt that he was ready to become an astronaut, that he had studied enough, he had prepared enough, he had worked enough to be certain that he could take the test for admission to the NASA space program and pass it. So he registered for the exam, he took it, and comfortably went home saying, I passed it. So he went home waiting for the results sometime later, and finally the letter arrived. The notification where he would find out if he had passed the test. So he opened it. He opened that letter very excitedly. Wow, he failed it. He could not believe he had failed the test. And yet he comforted himself saying that, that's why they are given 3 chances to pass that test because it's very hard. So he shouldn't worry about that situation. What he needed to do is to study more, to work harder, to prepare harder, and take the test again. And that way he would be able to join the space program. So that's what he did. He studied more, a lot more actually. And he did more assignments, more work assignments, and more preparation until finally he said, there is nothing I can do to prepare more for the test. I am ready, and I'm certain this time I will pass it. So he took the test, went home, this time telling himself, there is no way that I failed that test. So when the letter arrived, he openly excited again. Wow. He had failed it one more time. And so Rick couldn't believe it because he had done so much. He had prepared so much, and he just didn't know what else to do to be able to pass the test. He was dumbfounded, not only because he had failed the second time, but also because his lifelong dream of becoming an astronaut was seriously at risk of never, ever happening. So he did what many of us would do in a situation like that. In a situation like that is he started asking God for direction. And so as time went by, he said that he heard God's voice very audibly in his life. And God asked him, Rick, what is your purpose in life? And Rick immediately said to become an astronaut. He had been saying that over and over for many, many years, but he didn't hear anything else from God. So a second time later on, God came and asked him the same question. Rick, what is your purpose in life? Immediately, once again, he said to become an astronaut. That's what he had been saying all along. But he did not hear anything else from God. Finally, a third time God came, asked him the same question. Rick, what is your purpose in life? However, Rick was better prepared this time. He said, God, you know everything. You know my heart. You know that I want to be an astronaut. but it seems like that's not the answer you want to hear. What do you want to tell me? So he said that he heard God's voice clearly asking him a second question, a different question. He said, Rick, at the end of your life, how do you want to be remembered? As the best astronaut? So Rick paused and he thought, no, that's not what I want. I don't want to be remembered as the best astronaut. I want to be remembered as the best father, the best husband, and the best friend who, so that's what I want. And immediately God said, that is your purpose in life. So Rick understood at that time that God really wanted him to do something different. God wanted him to reprioritize his life and make sure that he was living in such a way that he could really spend time with his family. He would be intentional in building the memories and becoming the best father and the best husband in their lives. So, yes, that's what Rick did. And what do you know? He took the test a third time and passed it. He certainly succeeded. And so I'm very excited to tell you that, when I met Rick at that time, and let me share the screen so you can see what I'm saying here, because it's actually something beautiful that hopefully you're able to see my screen. I'm not sure if it's displaying. Let me reshare again. That, I met Rick when he had been an astronaut for some time already. And, but yet we were not aware that something horrible was going to happen, that our lives were going to be changed, because Commander Rick Husband, he passed away at the age of 45 when the space shuttle Columbia that was re-entering the Earth's atmosphere disintegrated, and he was traveling in that Columbia shuttle. So for us, it was a horrible tragedy. We could not believe that Rick had died. We were devastated. And when we gather at the memorial service to celebrate Rick's life and to basically remember him, and there were a lot of people, thousands of people gathered there to celebrate Rick's life and to share how he was the best husband, the best father, and the best friend who just happened to work as an astronaut. And so I was wondering, it's like, wow, it's like Rick really did live a life, an intentional life, because what he wanted people to say, even though he died young at 45, that's actually what people were saying about him when he died. So I asked myself, what would happen if you were to die now? What would happen? Would people be able to say the same things? And the answer came very quickly. No. People around me, my wife, my family, others, they wouldn't be able to say good things about me, because I hadn't been living my life the same way that Rick did. I was not being intentional. I didn't even know my purpose. So it really impacted me. And I started looking for my purpose. And I started thinking, it's like, how is it why that Rick has such a profound impact in my life? What did he do? What did he do so that I would listen to him and I would receive his influence? And really started when he died. It was such a huge impact that really changed my life, transformed my life, and I started living it differently. So I started thinking of his interactions with me and with other people around him, his communication style. Let me tell you, for example, that every time he would see you, he would smile, huge smile, like he was really happy to be there with you. And before he would really start talking long, he would ask you, How are you doing? How's your family? How's your work? How are things going? He would become very interested in you. And so he would show that he cared for you. And so all those things ended up creating a special feeling that, if we would, my wife and I would tell each other, like, man, I cannot believe that an astronaut is interested in us. But with time, it wasn't really about being an astronaut because it was just about him being our friend. And just like we were saying, Rick was to us the best father, the best husband, and the best friend who just happened to work as an astronaut. So I started recognizing that what Rick was doing, he was communicating to connect, but to connect in such a way that he would connect with our hearts and create a special feeling and create a special memory, a special connection. So one thing that I learned since then, because I started studying these practices, not only Rick's, but other people who were excellent communicators. And so what I learned is that Maya Angelou said that at the end of the day, people won't remember what you said or what you did. They will remember how you made them feel. They will remember how you made them feel. And that's exactly what I remember about Rick, how he made me feel. And then I kept studying about great leaders of the world, past and present leaders like, Nelson Mandela, Mother Teresa, Gandhi, or even people who are alive like John Maxwell and Malala Yousafzai. People who we listen to them, and they have changed millions of people. They have been transformational, and they actually share similar practices, or they actually live similar practices like Rick Husband did. Great communicators connect with their heart before they ask for a hand, before they ask for help. They show that they care for people. And it was actually, John Maxwell said that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. People do not care how much you know until they know how much you care. So that's what I want to tell you today. What are those practices? How can you actually be such a leader that when you speak, people listen, but not just to listen because you're the boss or you're the owner, but because they really want to listen, because they want to receive your influence, whether it's an employee, your family, a customer, a vendor, anyone around you. So I want to share some principles of public speaking that will help you become a much better influencer. And going back to history, public speaking is nothing new. Even though I show you a picture of more recent leaders, it was Aristotle who came up with these three components of influence: ethos, logos, and pathos. Well, ethos is really the principle of who you are as an individual, what you represent, your background, your education, your experience, the credentials that you may have, what gives you credibility. Is really who you are as the messenger. And certainly it's important, but that's not really the main thing that connects with people. You would think that maybe it's two. Number two, logos, the words. The words what is what connects with people. The logic, the logical flow of the information you share. And yes, that is important, but that is not what connects with people. I want to share with you now something extremely important. It's the pathos principle. Pathos. Persuasion cannot occur in the absence of pathos. It's an appeal to the audience's emotion. And the perfect tool to appeal to emotion is stories. Stories, they build pathos because humans are wired for it. They're wired for stories. And there are three types of stories that you can share with others and be an influence and make that connection, that emotional connection. The first type of story is the story about yourself, personal stories, something that you have lived, something that you have experienced, or somebody close to you has experienced. Another type of story is stories about customer or clients. Those are great to share as well. And thirdly, stories about your company or your brand. Stories is what connects with people, especially when you share them in such a way that they create an emotional connection. And let me tell you, this has been studied by many, but I want to show you this example of a TED Talk, one of the most successful TED Talks. And so this is not really for all TED Talks, nor that is for most of them. It's just one, but those that are very successful stories or TED Talk speeches, they have a lot in common with this distribution. Ethos, credibility is just about 10% of the message. Logos, the flow, the logical flow of information, 25%. But pathos, the emotional connection, the stories, that's 65% of the time of that speech is dedicated to build pathos. Notice that 65% over 50% of the time, 65 is to build pathos, the emotional connection. So your speeches need to be structured in a similar way, where 60 to 80% of the time, this green section, between 60 and 80% of the time, they need to be pathos. And the remaining time needs to be distributed between ethos and logos, just like it is here. That's the way you can build a great speech. But let me go deeper here, because it was, again, Aristotle who invented, at least it's attributed to him, the three acts play, or the three acts, or the play in three acts. And he simply described, this is a story with a beginning and an end, and good fortune is above and bad fortune is below. So the hero of the story experiences some difficulty and then he succeeds. So maybe we were talking about a Hollywood movie where basically the first act is this section, the early section above, where good fortune occurs. The characters are introduced and we learn about the hero of the movie and his world before the adventure starts. And then during Act 2, the hero's world is turned upside down and we learn about the obstacles the hero must overcome. And Act 3, that's where the problem is solved. The hero's world is transformed and everyone lives happily ever after. So a 3-act storytelling structure where basically we see here needs to include a dramatic arc, which includes tension, struggle, and a happy ending. Now, let me modify this slightly, because this is what I want you to pay even closer attention. This is the same model, a 3-act story. And I call this is more for a business presentation, for a sales presentation, for a motivational speech, for a sales speech. The first act is the setup, the situation. The second act is the confrontation, when there is a complication. And finally, the third act is the resolution. Notice how the setup and the resolution are a different level of success, of good fortune. Because what we want to ensure is that the hero of the story not only goes back to the old normal, but ends up in a much better place after the conflict is resolved. So set up, conflict, and resolution. And that conflict, that stress, that challenge, that dramatic arc is what keeps your audience engaged. So Act 1, the status quo is described. The current state of the company, the current state of your customer, or the industry maybe, or the employees, whoever you are communicating with. What is the setup? What is the current state? Act 2, what are the obstacles? What are the obstacles that are outlined, and the solutions rather, that may exist to overcome what is discussed? The situation. So that complication arises, potential opportunities come to fix the problem, and then Act 3, finally, whether it's the company, the employees, the customer, they end up experiencing a transformation. Maybe it's your company's products or services that end up solving the problem, the challenge. and resolving it in such a way that the customer ends up in a much better place, or the employees end up in a much better place. So when you share this type of story structure in 3 acts, and the customer or the employees, the company, the industry, they end up in a much better place because you solve the confrontation, the complication through your services, through your products, through your strategy, and you're able to use a story to illustrate how this can occur. The audience is very receptive to follow your lead. So when you build a speech, going back to reviewing real quick, you need to incorporate stories, because stories are designed. I mean, we are designed as human beings to be able to relate to stories, to connect with stories. And so if you share it well, it will create an emotional impact that will help us align our minds, you as the speaker, me as the audience, or vice versa. And we end up, through the story itself, synchronizing, having the same feelings and emotions, to such extent that as we hear the story and the character, the hero of the story, overcome the problems, then we think as the audience that we can experience the same resolution, that we can also overcome our problems. So this story is not about you as the hero. Your audience is the hero. You're just a guide, a mentor, who can help the hero of the story experience a resolution to the problems or challenges or opportunities that he or she is facing. So I hope this is making sense, because it's stories that will allow you to connect with people emotionally. So those two, pathos and storytelling, they go hand in hand. There's a lot more. There's a lot more, certainly, but I'm just focusing on some quick lessons that you can start applying immediately. There is a lot more that I cover in 2 days training, but I'm focusing on these two principles: pathos, connecting with emotion, through a story, through storytelling. Let me share this next slide with the components of a great story. Again, I say story, but I mean a speech as well, because the speech is mostly a story, or stories in plural. That story, a signature story, something that is like a narrative with a beginning, middle, and end. I mentioned 3 types of stories already. Personal experiences, something that you have lived yourself, something that close to you has lived, and you are aware of it because you were close to that person. Those are the personal stories. Those are the best stories to use in your speeches, something that is a personal experience. Number 2, the second type of stories is stories about your customers or your clients. Those are great stories as well, especially as you're trying to influence somebody to do something better or buy something from you, because you have other stories of clients, or stories of other clients, to prove that the hero of that story, the other client, can be successful. Therefore, the new client can also be successful through your product and services. Stories, 3 types of stories. The third one is about the company or your brand. That is when the company has had some history, the formation or the difficulties, and how the company or the brand has been able to overcome challenges, and that's what defines the company. So, but they all have to be real stories. You have to make sure they're real. The characters, the settings, the challenges, they must feel real to the audience. Because when a story does not sound real, when they sound fictitious, the audience will start recognizing, will start feeling it that way, that is not real. And you will lose a lot of credibility. They will think that you're lying to them. So therefore, it has to be real. Number 3, you have to introduce empathetic characters. What do I mean by that? The audience should be able to relate to the character. I said earlier, the audience has to be able to relate to the hero of the story. They have to identify themselves in that hero. And if the hero, yes, who's struggling, ends up having a resolution and becomes very successful, then the audience, because the character is empathetic, the hero is empathetic, the audience will feel that they can also be successful through your help, through your guidance, through your mentoring, through your product or service, because they can relate to the characters of the story. Make it intriguing. What do I mean by that? Make it thought-provoking, make it novel, make it interesting, make it entertaining. But the point is that the audience has to be captivated by your story. Include details. Why details? The little things, the little details is important because it lends credibility to the story. If you use, for example, a dollar figure, I mean, it kind of sounds like it's legitimate because you know exactly the amount. Or if you use a date, or if you use a city name, something details, maybe small, but vivid. They're important details that make the story sound credible. And yet, let me give you a caveat there. Make sure you don't overdo it. Too many details kills the story. Too many details ends up flattening the emotion. You lose the audience. It becomes a boring story. So some details, some important details, but not too many, because your story become boring. Number 6, reveal a surprise. That is the twist. The moment when the audience says like, oh my goodness, I was not expecting that to occur. I didn't see that coming. Introduce something like that in the story. And number 7, include conflict and tension. Because without them, without conflict and tension, it's boring. It's very flat. An empathetic hero overcoming a meaningful hurdle and succeeding at the end, obviously that's what we want. It is an irresistible story. So include conflict and tension. So again, I've shared 2 principles with you. The principle of pathos, connecting with emotion, and the principle of the 3-act storytelling structure. I told you earlier, there is a lot more to share. And let me show you one more. I only covered 2 principles, but there is a deliver the big picture. Like, what do I mean by that, the big picture? One objective, only one objective. That is the big picture. Try to think of the big objective, the big picture, with one sentence. And everything else that you add to your speech has to support that objective. If it doesn't support it, it's extra and you need to remove it. Use smart words. What do I mean by that? Less is more. John Maxwell says that you got to bring the cookies to the lower shelf so that anybody can grab those cookies, can understand your story, can relate to your story. So that is what smart words represent. Beautiful ideas. You got to present beautiful ideas. This is where you may have heard this term where rhetoric devices are very helpful, like analogies and metaphors. That's the way you beautify your speech, by creating or by leveraging analogies and metaphors and other resources that I can share with you later on. Be innovative. This is very important because the audience has to feel like this is an interesting story. You need to create the ideal environment to experience epiphanies, to experience discoveries in your life, so that you build a speech that is novel, that is entertaining, that is new, that it feels like new to the audience. Don't start with slides. That's a common mistake, starting with slides. Start by filling your mind with a lot of information. With a lot of the information you will use to eventually create a structure and create the 3-act structure. And later on, if it's needed or required, you use the PowerPoint slides. And the signature story form, actually I skipped one, the conquer your fears. Great communicators are made, they are not born. There are many techniques that you can leverage to defeat your fears, to conquer your fears. It requires practice, lots of practice. But let me emphasize that it's not just practicing, because you could be practicing a mistake and do it over and over and over, and it will always continue being a mistake. Evaluated practice, where you receive feedback about your speech, where you get evaluated to improve it. The signature story formula. Everyone has a story. I've heard it from many say, no, I don't really have anything good to share. everyone has a story. Everyone has a signature story. People and companies, people and organizations. So how do you build that story? I have some very good information that I call the formula for a signature story that I would love to share in the future. And lastly, how do you grow as a professional communicator? Because you don't really have to be a public speaker, but certainly you can continue growing your level of performance in a similar way that professional communicators do it. How does that happen? I would love to share this in a future occasion, and but certainly let me tell you this: just like we learned from Rick, you have to be intentional. You have to be intentional because your growth does not happen on automatic. Your growth does not happen on automatic. You have to make the effort to make it happen. So if you want to learn more about this topic, you can reach out to me at info@tli-global.com. Again, info@tli-global.com, and I would be delighted to be of assistance. Thank you very much for being with us. I wish you the very best. Talk to you soon.